Welcome to a new live session of Seibert Media. I have a guest, it's Christian. Hi, Christian.
Hi, Martin. How's
How are you
life?
today?
Can't complain. Nice weather in Berlin, so it looks a little bit like spring, so I'm not complaining.
Awesome. We're both from Germany, but we're doing an English session because we're hoping for a lot of international viewers to see this as well. We're going to be talking about the Atlassian ecosystem today, single sign-on for Atlassian tools. That's mainly our topic, right?
Absolutely.
Why is that important?
Well, there's a couple of things why that is important. I mean, there obviously are some benefits that you have from. Actually, let me put one step back. I mean, in the security side of things, there's at the moment a movement to not have a separate account in every application where people write down their passwords in Excel files or Post-its, but to use one single identity across the enterprise. Make sure that there's a strong and secure password on that, and possibly a second factor. Yeah. So that is an overarching trend that it provides more security on an enterprise level. Next to all the other good benefits like better auditing, better compliance with standards and those kind of things, but also a better user experience for the user. So if that is an overarching strategy that a lot of enterprises have, then we obviously need a way to include the Atlassian tools into those overarching enterprise identity management systems. And ultimately, that's what our plugins, among others, do.
Yeah. And I would also chime in and say, on the one hand, it's important for IT security that you have this central repository of your employees. So if someone leaves, I can deactivate this one account and everything else will fall into place. The reality today is we can't do that. We all have these offboarding lists, and they have multiple entries where we have to go because they don't work with our Google accounts or Microsoft accounts or whatever we use for this central repository. But still being able to put all these Atlassian tools under this one umbrella is a benefit for auditing and all this stuff. I'm drawn to think it's even more important to have users use software systems that I throw at them, because I once heard of the conveyor belt of software where like in an airport, you see all these suitcases circling, and there's a new software coming on the conveyor belt, and you think, oh, let's ignore it. Maybe it's going to pass. And then it passes, and off it goes, and you never see this suitcase again, right? And this is a very common thing with enterprise software. It's introduced, no one uses it. 2 years later, it's dead. And we both wouldn't be holding this webinar if the Atlassian tools weren't here to say. But at the same time, as an IT department and also as a user, I want it easy. I want it easy in, easy out. I don't want to hassle with typing in new passwords or the same password over and over again. And you seem to be the market leader for that, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, depending on which of the Atlassian apps you look at, we have something between 90%, 97% of the licensed user share down
Where's
to 6. That's on Bamboo. Down to on Jira, it's somewhere in the 64, 65%. Confluence, slightly below that. Yes, I would say we are the market leader. And we've been in this for quite some time, especially with the standard that we'll be talking about, SAML 2.0, which is sort of the first standard that's really fit for those hybrid environments you have today. In terms of some applications in the cloud, some behind your firewall, and all of them should be federated into single sign-on. Today, the standard you use for that is really SAML, or the most common used one. And we adopted SAML sort of in 2012, and hence have quite a history in the marketplace, and lots of feature requests, lots of customer situations when they started using our plugin have actually then driven a lot of the development. I mean, you do a lot of apps as well, so you surely know what I'm talking about. Once you throw something onto the market that has a basis functionality, and people start using it, then you'll get to see a lot of the challenges that those enterprise customers have, and get more than your fair share of feature requests.
If you're thinking about why your solution is so successful in the marketplace, and I give you 3 buckets, like you're awesome in marketing, you have an awesome product, or you have awesome support, how would you fill those buckets in? You have 100% points to throw into those buckets. Where are you strong at?
I think we're certainly strong on the product and the support side, and that is for me the most important. Luckily, the marketplace itself makes it relatively easy to discover the solution. And even more than that, I think since we are deployed in a lot of very large enterprise data center deployments, etc., a lot of partners like yourself are actually driving the sales. So on the marketing side, that's, I think, where we do the least at the moment.
Channels, kind of like this marketplace channel, and then the partners who consult with customers.
Yeah, and even if you're awesome in marketing, but you have a crap product, it's not going to last. So I think having a great product, and also we get to talk about that a little bit later, depending on the deployment scenario. For a lot of customers, we're actually the only way they can get users into their applications and for those users to log in. So in some of these deployments, we're absolutely business critical, and those customers pay a fair share of money for their add-on. So they should expect and can expect a good level of quick and reliable support.
Can you tell us a little bit about your team that's working with you on this solution? Like people would think, oh, why are they in Germany, in Berlin? What kind of company is that? Give us some figures.
Well, in Berlin, part of our team sits in Saarbrücken, which is in the southwest of Germany. That's actually where I was born and where my business partner still lives when we created the company some 20 years ago. So some of the development, or most of the development team actually lives and works there. And the team around me is who works with me here in Berlin is bit more the marketing, partner management, but also development and a lot of QA and testing as well. And that's more historically because that's where my business partner and I live, and that's where we know people and have built that. And we're also a good team in terms of that we play to each other's strengths. So the stuff I'm usually relatively strong in is here sort of clustered around me or close to me. And vice versa.
Okay, cool. Yeah. When we prepared this, you showed me a couple of slides. We were trying to streamline it so that people don't have to see too many slides and we can dive into the real application real quick. But how about we move on and you have your presentation style of this session?
Oh, absolutely. And some of the things we discussed already, so I'm just going to quickly go through those.
I'm going to be sure to speed you up once we...
I have no doubt. Okay, let me share my screen. Desktop, here we go. So, can you see the presentation?
Yeah, all good.
Okay, perfect. Maybe let's start with sort of defining or talking about 3 things up front, because if I don't do that, it might get a little bit confusing. For me, single sign-on is really to sign into your enterprise application once. So either if you're in a Microsoft domain, you've logged into your PC, or even if you're not using a domain, if you G Suite or Azure AD, you've signed in once the first time you try to access any of your enterprise applications. And afterwards, you're automatically signed into all of them. And that's more maybe also the differentiating point to, for example, Atlassian Crowd. Where it's really in most deployments much more about you log once into the Atlassian applications and then you're into those applications. Here we're really trying to fit the Atlassian products into a larger single sign-on system. Yeah. Then on the second side, let's also separate authentication and provisioning. So authentication for me is really a user that you have in one of your directories in Jira, Confluence, Bitbucket, you name it, to authenticate that existing user in that directory. And then provisioning is really the matter of how does that user record actually get into the directory in the first place. Yeah. And in a lot of the standard deployments where you have Active Directory, you can use LDAP to synchronize your users into the Atlassian application. So LDAP is one way of provisioning, and it's one way that the Atlassian applications can do out of the box. Nevertheless, in a lot of the scenarios where our customers use us, we also have to solve the challenge of provisioning. So their first problem, if you use Azure AD, or if you use Okta, or if you use Google G Suite, yeah, very often what they start with is the challenge: how do I get my users into the Atlassian applications in the first place? And then only secondly, to authenticate them afterwards. Yeah, and we have solutions for both of those problems for a lot of the identity providers. Why SSO? We quickly talked about that. We said, well, it's easier for the users, just no extra passwords anymore. A lot of the feedback we get from the solution partners is also that they see a better acceptance and adoption of new systems. You said about your conveyor belt. So it's certainly easier for IT to get the users into the application in the first place, but then it's also easier for the users. They are just signed in, so the hesitance to use a new system is a little bit less. And we also talked about the policy and stuff. And especially if you in Europe have something like ISO 9001, 2701, or SAS in the US, some of those frameworks, then being compliant with those frameworks or being compliant with your own processes that you have to have is easier if you have the centralized user management. And there are some industries which outright demand that as well, if it's a more controlled industry.
If you're telling about IT wants to get in users into systems, I assume you have another slide where you talk about this synchronization as well, right? Because I think this is a big part of what helps people, not only that they can possibly log in, but also that they actually get the full list of all users into the system automatically.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. There are two ways that we support provisioning, and they have their pros and cons and work in different circumstances. One is just-in-time provisioning, and the other one is synchronization. And I have a slide on that. So if you bear with me for 2-3 minutes,
Sure.
it might make it easier on the slide. We talked about us a little bit. You mentioned it's the #1 single sign-on app for Atlassian Server and Datacenter. It's got, to give you an idea, about 4,500 installs with about 5 million licensed users at the moment. So if you do the math, you can actually see that we get used in quite a few large and bigger environments. And a decent amount of our customers are actually data center customers. And we can talk about that a bit later, because Datacenter has SAML, a basic SAML support itself, but very often customers experience that's a good starting point, but it's not quite what they need, or doesn't give them what they need, and that's where we pick up a lot of the data center customers.
Can you name like 1 or 2 things that people want to have on top, although it's free in Datacenter, they still buy your app?
Absolutely. Some want encryption. Other people want the ability to create and update users, so there's no provisioning features in the data center SAML. Yet others have a decent amount of policies. Others want something like single sign-out, where if you log out of the Atlassian application or any other application, you get logged out of the identity provider and all the other logged-in applications. So it's different things. So there's a variety of
that sounds stuff. Like pretty basic things.
Yeah, it's pretty basic things, but you'd be surprised how many, especially cloud apps, so don't necessarily always implement all those.
I'm surprised how easy Atlassian comes away with saying they have SAML and then don't do the job fully.
Well, don't get me wrong. There's a lot. If you just have your LDAP connected data center, and the only thing you want is single sign-on into that, and you're happy that the encryption is via HTTPS. You don't you're not concerned about single sign-out, and that's a decent
in the middle who is this SSL encryption. I'm done, right? I'm like, people can sniff passwords.
Yeah, I mean, I love the way you say it, because it pushes our app. But to be absolutely fair, there's a decent amount of customers where that is enough, and they are fine with
Yeah, but like, there's
using
also
the
a
data
decent
center
amount of
SAML.
customers who buy Atlassian Cloud and simply don't give a damn that their data is stored with every app vendor unencrypted, and they don't have any DPAs with those people, and they simply don't seem to care if they're in violation of GDPR, or, for example, for Draw.io, if you compare that to Glyphy, they limit your ability to use your diagrams commercially. I assume that a lot of customers simply don't know and don't care. So they are kind of violating the EULA of the app. Okay, however, if you're thinking about SSO, I get the impression that you really want to look into a professional SSO solution like the one from Resolution. There are obviously other solutions out there. We're going to be talking about competition and where they are strong and where you're strong later. I'm eager to learn how Christian does that, but let's move on with your slides.
Yeah, maybe one word to, you're right, we'll talk about competition later, but don't forget one thing, and that's where we're dead serious about things, is this is a plugin that does authentication. Yeah, it's at the heart of your instance, especially if it's an internet attached instance. So I think this is really one of the things where you should look at how much do I trust that vendor, and how much do I see and do I feel independent verification is being done. So we can talk all day long if your small panel in Confluence, if that app is critical or not, and if it fails, it's not a problem. But I think this is the heart of your instance, and they should see that you pick a vendor who has a decent amount of installs. I mean, we obviously have a lot. There are others who have a decent amount, so we're not the only choice. But this might also not be the app where you want to pick someone who's got 3, 5, 15 installs. Because the chance for us, for example, we have some of the largest customers, a lot of high-value targets who have internet-attached Jiras. They commission their own penetration testing against those instances running our plugins. So we get a lot of the benefit, and a variety of them shares those reports with us. So we get a lot of benefit of independent verification, and those customers, I think. So even if there is a security vulnerability at some point, and with all software there will be, so there's no question about will there ever be, there always will be, then you want a vendor who finds out about that quickly, and then also can fix that. So I think this is the category of app where you might not want to choose the low installation numbers, where you should settle among them, and then you can, that's really your decision if you feel the top 3 or top 4 vendors are good enough.
Yeah, cool. I fully agree. Let's move on.
Yeah, let's talk a little bit about SAML as a protocol, and I'll start with Kerberos, which is the oldest of the single sign-on protocols. It's used internally in Active Directory, but it's got a big downside. It's from a time where people didn't really envisage the internet or cloud services. So by design, it really only works behind the firewall within sort of your administrative domain. And in speaking with Active Directory, really only with domain joint devices. And I'm going to talk about Kerberos a little bit later again. The protocol that we support is SAML 2.0. It's from 2004 standard. And it's sort of the first set of the protocols to design to use within your administrative domain, but also across domains, so with cloud services in mind. And at the moment, it's the most widely adopted enterprise single sign-on protocol for those kind of hybrid cloud, on-premise, closely federated systems. You may mention something like OAuth, which I don't have on the slide, which is newer, but that's more for loosely federated systems, and you see that more being used for giving individual apps access to something, or for API authentication. Let me give you two more terms that I'll be using, because then I jump into the next slide where I show you how SAML authentication actually works, because I think that understanding is sensible to understand how we do some of the things and what are the limitations and also the benefits of how the protocol works. One thing is the identity provider, and that's the thing that holds the user's identity information and has the ability to perform the authentication. So that would be Azure AD, that would be Active Directory with Federation services, or Okta, or G Suite. They have your username, they have the password.
What's the leading source? Is it always Microsoft, or do you see a lot of Google? How's the...
It depends a little bit in which part of the world we find ourselves in. So if we look more Europe or Germany, then it's absolutely something like Active Directory with Federation services and some slight movements towards Azure AD. If we look towards the UK or even more towards the US, in the US, it's definitely Azure AD, it's definitely Okta, Ping Identity, Google G Suite for smaller companies. So I mean, like with anything in the US or the Anglo-American markets, cloud is maybe 2-3 years. Adoption of cloud is maybe 2-3 years ahead of what we would see in Germany. Yeah.
Okay.
And then the last term is the service provider, and that's the thing that provides the application/service that requires the user to be authenticated. So in our examples, that would be Jira, Confluence, etc., with our plugin installed. So how does such a single sign-on with SAML actually work? So if you imagine, and maybe one thing, if I say Jira or Confluence or Bitbucket, I generally mean all of them. If there's some difference in application, I'll point them out. So if you go to, if you're not authenticated in Jira and you go to the Jira page, then Atlassian would usually show you the login page. Yeah, and that's what our app listens for, intercepts that showing of the login page. In step 2, we generate what's called a SAML request, which is that request to be authenticated, and then redirects the user's browser to the identity provider in step 3 with that SAML request. The identity provider takes that SAML request, passes it, makes sure if signatures are turned on or encryption, decrypts it, verifies our signatures, and then makes sure he authenticates the user. So, and if you're in Active Directory and you're already logged into your PC, then ADFS will already know you by the Kerberos ticket, so you're already authenticated. If you're somewhere else, let's say Google G Suite, and it's the first time that G Suite sees you today, then it'll pop up the username and password prompt, yeah, to make sure it authenticates you. Also, at that point, the identity provider makes sure that any other policies that are configured on its side are actually met. So usually you can configure a lot more policies on the identity provider side, like
authentication and this stuff.
Yeah, 2-factor authentication or 2-factor for someone in an admin group, smart card on a PC, certificate on a PC, a certain location to log in from, a certain IP address range, lots of policies that you can configure there. So once the identity provider says, OK, I'm happy, I know who you are, and you adhere to all the policies, then in step 5, the identity provider actually puts the SAML response together, redirects the user's browser back to Jira, URL of our plugin. So we get that SAML response. And then we can decrypt it, verify signatures. And such a SAML response contains something that's called attributes. And the minimum attribute that we need to have is a username. We need to obviously know which user to log in. But also, if we do something like just-in-time provisioning, which would be done on step 8, and I'll talk a bit more about that later, then we actually, so just-in-time provisioning is creating the user during login based on information that's contained in that SAML response. That's what just-in-time provisioning is. Yeah. So then we actually need to configure the identity provider to send us a little bit more information, like an email address, like full name, And if you want to manage groups centrally on the identity provider, then also to send us the groups that the user's membership that the user has a membership of.
Is that something that deciphers you from your competition, that you can automatically, on demand, create users and profiles? Or is that something that you see in other solutions as well?
Well, that's what it depends.
So
All of the above.
so.
Some of the competition has this just-in-time provisioning as well. Others don't. So, for example, Datacenter SAML from Atlassian doesn't have it. So that's where it differentiates us from the Datacenter SAML and some of the competition.
At least for this webinar, they've lost my vote either way, so we can ignore them for not being encrypted with passwords and this stuff. Let me ask a question. Like, I have one banner, a linchpin banner. We do sell intranet-based, Confluence-based intranets with this linchpin suite a lot. And one of the things that come with linchpin is beefed up profile pages. So I have a really rich user profile there. And we're always, or customers are always trying to make those profiles be available in other systems as well. Unfortunately, we do get a lot of data from ERP systems like SAP, for example. We do get some information from Active Directories or user directories. How well are you in enhancing those attributes? Because we did have some situations where we were trying to get all of the profile information about the user and put them in the linchpin profile page for the user, and it wouldn't work. Actually, I don't know whether it was with your plugin or different, but I would want to ask, how do you make those profiles sync?
Okay. Well, the answer is a little bit twofold. I mean, first of all, I have on my to-do list to pick up the phone to you and talk to you exactly about that topic, because we get a lot more data than we use today. And it's a shame because we throw it away, and something like your deployments could use that data. So we certainly can generally fill a lot of the fields that the Atlassian application.
So this is not only a webinar for the people viewing this. It's obviously you and me discovering some joint venture activities as well. That's funny.
Exactly. Yeah, definitely. But to answer your question in the first place, so at the moment with just-in-time provisioning, we really only fill generally the fields that the application has. So in Jira, that's really just your full name, email, and username. However, on UserSync, which is the newer of our provisioning tools that we support, and well, I'll define that later. Just take it for things. There we can already write a lot more information into the user profile. So that doesn't mean it's visible in the Atlassian application, but at least we can already pick that up with, for example, script runner scripts, and customers can do a lot more with it. And obviously, the next step for us is to expand that to cover just-in-time provisioning as well, and pick up the phone to people like yourselves to see is there a way how we can hand that over into your applications. Because I would say from the feature requests we have, being able to use that data to write it into other applications that extend the user profile is somewhere around the top 10 of our feature requests at the moment.
Yeah, I wouldn't say that the customer demand that we have is that high, but especially getting those enriched profiles back into other systems is a very often seen case. I know that your case is more, I already have that in G Suite or in Google, and now I want to pull it into Confluence. One of the challenges is that I think if you have a company with 50,000 employees, most of those profiles will be crap. They won't have a lot of data in them because the employees don't have any incentive in any system to really make a really good profile, which is different with linchpin because people actually use their profiles there a lot. So I get pictures, I get skills, I get language proficiencies, and all these things. And then I see customers a lot trying to get this back in. But let's talk about this later. We don't want to bore people out. Let's try to get to the end of your slides.
Exactly. Let me just finish this slide. So basically, our plugin passes on step 7 the SAML response so that we know which user we should log in. If just-in-time provisioning is turned on, then in step 8, we actually look, if the user doesn't exist, we create the user based on the attributes in the SAML response. If the user exists, then we see if it needs updating, then generate the user session and redirect the user's browser back to the page he originally requested. So if you were clicking on a deep link in an email or so, you actually see the link that you went through. And in the perfect scenario where you already authenticated against the identity provider, this whole thing that took me like 2 minutes to talk through takes about somewhere between 100 and 200 milliseconds. So an observant user actually sees the URL changing twice, and that's all about it. So he basically clicks the link, sees the URL, bang, bang, Bob sees the page he wants to have. And he might actually have been created in the Atlassian application during that time.
So my experience is it takes longer than 200 milliseconds, but I'll believe that for now.
OK, I mean, you'll see some of that later.
Yeah, okay.
300-400 milliseconds, fine. So it is
it's OK.
Like
for an initial login that involves a micro user being created, I'm probably well able and willing to wait 10 or 15 seconds. Especially when, as a user, I somewhat understand that someone or something is happening, and it's not just a blank screen that I have to stare at. And through this redirection and those things are happening, and I'm seeing something on the page. I just had an experience today when I was recording something out of Office 365, when I wanted to change a language, and in 2 browsers it didn't work. And the only browser it would work was Firefox, and it took like 30 seconds to load the dropdown for the languages because they have so many languages, and somehow that was really painful. I don't see it. But let's see that in your real life demonstration later. How the user experiences that.
Yeah. There's a couple of things I would like you to take away from this slide, because it's some of the important things. First of all, if you look at this, everything happens via the user's browser. Yeah. So generally speaking, Jira doesn't need any direct network connectivity to the identity provider. So you don't have to punch any holes into the firewall. And also what we see a lot of people who deploy our plugin at the point when they used to have their Jira, for example, LDAP connected against Azure AD, they were happy with having to manually log in or to log in with the username. But now they move their Jira into AWS, or they move their Jira to be hosted with a solution partner, and don't want to set up a VPN, maybe don't want to give that solution partner admin credentials to their Active Directory. Then they actually, that's actually a compelling reason for them to move to something like a single sign-on together with just-in-time provisioning, because you no longer need those admin credentials for LDAP, and you don't need that direct network connectivity between Jira and the identity provider anymore.
May I ask a question in between?
Sure.
If I deactivate a user in G Suite, for example, the Jira won't know, right? Like, the user will still be active in Jira. He won't be able to log in because he won't be able to get through this authentication process that you just explained. But Jira will never know that this user is no longer active in my company, right?
Yeah, exactly. And that's the third point here. Since just-in-time provisioning happens on step 8, we can create users, we can update users, but it's dependent on a successful authentication here. And if you disable a user, the identity provider will already block the login. Yeah. So we have no chance via just-in-time provisioning to deactivate the user.
It's not a security problem. It's more of within Jira, I'm thinking I can add mention people, and I maybe be add mentioning people, but they are no longer in my company.
Exactly. You can assign them tasks. It uses up a license. So it's more a cleanliness problem than a fundamental security issue.
I would know
And what
apps to solve that. Like you can get a list of people who didn't log in for a long time, and then just like look. Probably 80% of those people will be obsoleted users either way. You could have a manual process or something in your ERP system or your offboarding that will make sure. Let's skip that. I just wanted to point that out.
Yeah, and our plugin already with the user sync side has something that can disable people after a certain time of inactivity. And our plugin can also re-enable them should they successfully log in. So if you accidentally disable someone on maternity leave and that person comes back 9 months later and successfully logs in again, then that person will get re-enabled if you configure our plugin to do that.
Oh, that's interesting. So I could use your plugin to save on Atlassian licensing costs by telling, oh, please disable my user after 2 days and then re-enable it once I log in again because I'm a sporadic user.
You absolutely could. I'm not sure if that's a great thing after 2 days, because you still want active users to be mentioned and assign new tasks and actually work with it. But no question about it. Some of our customers use it in a way. For example, we have one company who has got 400,000 employees, and they have a couple of Confluences dotted around the world. And they want people to be able to go to those Confluences, collaborate on a project, and then, not.
I know where you're getting at. So you won't have hundreds of Jiras with 400,000 users because only 1,500 users actually collaborate on this instance. Maybe it's a different set of users, but if they leave for months, you can just deactivate them. And I think this is also something that I love about Atlassian. They don't care. They don't. They don't have a licensing police trying to stop you and say, oh, this could be something that is against our EULA. It's more that you as a customer can do what you think is right. And what I do think is, at least the customers that we work with, they're really nice people in terms of paying for their licenses. And I don't see any cheating on their side. But in some cases, like as you described, if you have 400,000 people, you still want people to have the freedom to set up a new instance whenever they want. But it shouldn't always be an unlimited instance only because you want everyone to log in, because they won't do. And
exactly. And those customers wouldn't necessarily buy an unlimited in every one of those cases. They would just have you don't have access, email that person to get access, and this makes it much simpler. So I don't think Atlassian's really losing.
Probably earning more money this way because they give more freedom to people to do what is good for their business case. And
exactly.
Okay, we're still on the same slide.
Yeah, absolutely. No worries. The other thing worth mentioning is number 2 here, the service provider. So our plugin needs to make a decision on step 2, where we're going to redirect you without knowing who you are. So that's all simple. If you only have one identity provider, we direct everyone over there. But if you're a larger, more complex enterprise, who might have your users in some of them in Okta, some of them in Azure, others in AD, then we need to have a way to deal with those situations. And we have a couple, which I'm going to show quickly later on. So last but not least, no passwords are actually transmitted or synchronized across this flow. So the users, and that's also true for our synchronization, the users that we create in the Atlassian application don't have a password. So really their only way to log in is via this single sign-on flow. It also limits some of the things they can do. They couldn't do API with basic authentication, which today's world is not really a big problem. But for example, if you have Bitbucket and Git, you can't clone with username password. You need to do something like SSH keys in there. So there are some limitations by the nature of if you use the provisioning features that we have. Bringing me to provisioning, and I'm not going to talk about all those points, and I know it's a busy slide for webinar. Usually what I tell people is synchronization is better than just-in-time provisioning. Yeah, in most of the circumstances, synchronization is what you as a user want. However, in a lot of situations, just-in-time is the only thing that you can do. So just-in-time provisioning works with any SAML 2.0 identity provider, which means if you're using one of the ones where we haven't implemented an API to do synchronization, then that's all you got. And it beats just-in-time beats the hell out of having to do it manually. But it's the sites are, your users and groups are really only created during login. So they're also only updated when the next SAML flow happens. You can't deactivate them. We talked about that. And really only users and groups that are actually used are being created. If a user never logs in, he's not there. And synchronization is very much, we have implemented it for Azure AD, Okta, and G Suite within our app in a feature that we call User Sync. And then obviously there's the LDAP synchronization from that Atlassian can do natively. So if you're on somewhere where you can use LDAP or somewhere where you can use Azure AD, Okta, G Suite, then synchronization is usually the better choice. So everything is replicated close to whenever you do it on the identity provider. You can also deactivate users. You can, unless you define filters, everything gets synchronized. Everything is there, and it's there once shortly after it's been created on the identity provider.
I can only chime in for the synchronization part. I experience that so often with big customers on those linchpin intranets, that synchronization is really what you want to strive for, because you can deactivate users and all the things that you were talking about.
So how does that look? Let's start on the right where I say other IdPs, so not Active Directory. Ultimately, if it's Okta, Azure, Ping Identity, whatever, they usually pop up a form for you to enter your username, password, the first time you access their service. And then once you're authenticated in all the other applications. So they talk then SAML 2.0 with our plugin to log you into the Atlassian applications as well. I've made this chart on Active Directory, and I want to spend a minute on it because I think there's a fair amount of misconception, or maybe where some customers actually don't know some of these parts. A lot of people who use Active Directory, they will know Kerberos. Yeah, and a lot of the competition that you see in the marketplace, they actually come from a time where they implemented Kerberos. And then they saw that that the Kerberos world or the Kerberos only use cases are dying out. So they implemented SAML 2.0, let's say, over the last 12, 18 months. And they still lead a lot with Kerberos today. And some customers will approach you as a partner. Hey, have you got something that can do Kerberos? We decided on our plugin not to support Kerberos because we see those use cases actually dying out. So we started with SAML 2.0 straight away. And I think that's a competitive advantage because we had a long time since 2012 to really home our feature set on the SAML side. And whenever I pick conversation with a customer having Active Directory, once he realizes that he can actually get the best of both worlds with a single connection, if you have any non-domain joined devices that need to access your Jira things and be authenticated, then you need Active Directory federation services and SAML anyway. That there's no way to do that via Kerberos sensibly. However, if you go down that route, then the ADFS in your Active Directory can actually terminate or actually speaks Kerberos. So your domain joined devices still authenticate via Kerberos in the same way they would do with some other plugin against single sign-on. And then the ADFS translates that into SAML 2.0 and talks to our plugin. And
let me try to explain real quick what you're trying to get across.
Yes, please, because I don't feel I'm doing it.
Then you can tell me that I got this wrong. Okay. So if I am having an Active Directory that only supports Kerberos. I cannot use your plugin today. But as soon as I have a federated service from Microsoft, this Active Directory federated service, I can use Kerberos and the SAML 2.0 and all the other stuff. So if I'm in this unlucky situation that I'm working with this very old technology, what you tell me is, please think twice whether you will have to update your single sign-on solution tomorrow either way. And if you get this Active Directory federated services, which is, what is the, this is done for years already, right?
Yeah, it's the early 2000s. It's an additional role that you typically install on a domain controller, and so no additional licensing cost, usually no additional servers either. And 3-4 years ago, I would find myself in the situation to explain exactly what you said to customers. Today, that's a lot rarer, because if they use anything like Office 365, if they use Salesforce.com or so, any of those kind of systems, they will have deployed Active Directory federation services already. Yeah. So in today's world, I very rarely find us in the conversation to explain to a customer you need to deploy Active Directory federation services. So it's usually a question: have you got it? Yes, absolutely. And then the nice thing is, if you let Active Directory federation services terminate the Kerberos, then you can apply the same set of policies, things like second factor authentication, or from where you can log in. You can apply the same set of policies, regardless if that user comes in via Kerberos from a domain joined PC, or comes in from his tablet, or from a internet attached station. You can apply the same policies, you get the same audit logs, and you get them in the same place. So once customers actually realize that, that's usually the thing they deploy. So what a lot of the other plugins would have you do is either this and not use their Kerberos functionality anymore, or terminate Kerberos straight. But then you have to maintain a Kerberos configuration in their plugin and a SAML configuration in their plugin for all the other devices. And that's typically not what customers want.
OK.
Right. So that's it. We can do live stuff.
I always tend to tell people I'm sorry for taking so much of the time. But as a lot of people are consuming this as a video, they already know how long it will take, and they can skip parts and so on. So I'm not going to excuse us for taking a lot of time. I'm thankful for Christian to walk us through all these details. And now I'm really eager to find out how this looks in real life. And before we start, I understand that you will always be willing to help customers evaluate this. Even if they don't already pay for your app, you will still help them to get it up and running, right?
Oh, absolutely. You can just go book a free screen share session with us. We have resolution.de/go/calendly. You pick your slot, and we help you install it, evaluate it. And if you look at it support-wise, there isn't much going wrong with the plugin. So probably 70% of the time our support people spend is actually really doing these kind of screen share sessions with customers. Or what happens very often as well, we have a lot of step-by-step guides and YouTube videos how to do the installation. So what happens very often is that the customer comes, okay, I followed your step-by-step guide. It works. It's fantastic. But now I also want to include this or do that. So that you then have a 5 or 10 minute screen share session with that customer to tweak it to their liking, to tweak a template, to do some of the things where they want to use some of the more advanced functionality, which quite honestly is just too plentiful to document every potential combination of features.
Yeah. And you can also always come to your trusted Atlassian partner like Seibert Media, and they will help you do that as well.
Absolutely, and you do actually a fair amount of installations of our plugin, so you've got some really good guys on it.
Thanks.
So I thought what we could do is that probably going to take us the longest part, 6-7 minutes, is really do a setup from scratch with Azure AD and user sync.
Yeah, sure. You do your show. I'll watch and ask.
Good. So this is obviously a Confluence. I've got our app already installed, but not configured yet. So if you install the app, and I spare you how to install the app. So you've got a tab here, SAML single sign-on, and you've got one here, user sync. So the provisioning I want to show you today is user sync. So we configure that first, that we can actually start synchronizing users from Azure AD into the application, and then we set up the SAML connection to do login, the authentication for it. So if I click on user sync, it's got the concept of connectors that are the APIs that we implemented. So here's the Azure connector. What that will do, it will actually create an additional internal directory in Jira, or in this case, Confluence, where it will synchronize all the users into and groups. So I just need to quickly look at our. This is for everything. We tend to have a quick start guide, so that's really step-by-step introductions. I need to use some of that. So I'm going to go into Azure with our lab account. Here in Azure, you have Azure Active Directory. And there we need to go into App Registrations Preview. And let me see that I don't have, no, it doesn't look like it's there already. So a new registration, need to give it a name. Confluence, it's for accounts in my Azure Lab, and then I need to give it a callback URL, and that's why I needed the documentation here, because I can never remember this. I know that's the boring part of the, what is this here, demo Confluence / and then I can say register, and then I get the first two parts of what I need.
The cool thing that I'm seeing here, you had this on your slide already, but you put in a local URL that wouldn't be possible on the public internet. And the cool thing, you were explaining this earlier, is as only my browser is handling all this, this Azure thing, which is on the web, can actually authenticate through my browser this local machine. It's feels like magic for me.
It is, and I actually now realize this is the part where I was lying. If you use user sync, then the synchronization goes directly between the user exchange between your, in that case, Confluence and Azure AD. So in that case, Confluence needs direct connectivity to Azure to synchronize the users. However, for the authentication, you're absolutely right, and for the just-in-time provisioning, that's right as well. That's why I put the example of Jira moving to AWS and no more LDAP, for example. So, but also
you just need to have the Confluence talk directly to Azure to sync the users. So
yeah, not for the authentication. It's still true for the authentication, but user sync, what we actually did is implement the Azure Graph API to actually go and pull the user information from Azure and synchronize that on a regular basis. So I need the application ID here and the directory tenant ID, which I have here. Then I need to generate an application secret. So if I go to certificates and secrets here, new client secret, expires never, test.
You can see your mouse, so you may want to describe where you're going with the mouse, or it's
okay.
Very
Okay, so I just created the client secret, and like I said, there's a step-by-step guide on the website. So if you bottom right, you now see the password that Azure created to use this integration. So I can now click to copy that and copy that back into our connector configuration. So with this part, we basically generated a API for us on the Azure side to be able to pull that user information. So I'm nearly finished on the Azure side. The only thing I need to do is look at the permissions. What can this integration use? By default, is user read. That's not enough for us. So we need to have a couple more from the Graph API. We need to be able to use read all users. And I think it's basic read all. Yeah, user basic read all. Add this permission. And I need two more as an application. One is the directory read all, and then the user read all. So with those permissions, our UserSync app has access, read-only access to all the user information in that particular directory. Makes sense, hopefully?
Absolutely.
So this is the thing I have to do on Azure for the user sync to be able to use the API. So I'm going to go back to our connector. I now need to authorize that with the Azure admin user once. So I click on authorize. And then it'll pop me sort of normal consent screen and what kind of access I'm going to give that application in Azure. I'm going to accept. That's not good. Microsoft has that sometimes. Let's do that again.
While you're trying that, when I had this Office 365 session today, I was trying to pull up Microsoft Teams, and it was incredible. They really don't get this right easily. I was changing my language, so Microsoft Teams wouldn't know anything about that. I wanted to speak English now, so all was still in German. Okay, minor flaw. But the next thing was I had to authenticate 3 times. And then after the second, I thought, OK, something must be wrong. And then it worked after 3 times. And then it didn't work. And I started the Microsoft Teams app because I thought what didn't work in the browser could work in the app, which actually did. But I had to log in twice there again. It was kind of, no, that's not the usability I expect. But however, maybe you'll figure it out, or we'll have to believe you that this can work.
Well, it should actually. I mean, I know what error I did. I just need to see. Might have to start this again. No, no, I clicked wrong. Yeah, OK. Well, I can authorize it with that user as well. So now the authorization is complete. What I did wrong is I misspelled the URL here. I actually let the lab resolution DE part, which is where it redirects me back to the application. And actually, Azure, in that case, the error message said exactly that. So I just had to read the error message and knew what I was doing wrong.
OK.
So, but now I've authorized this. If I want to have this run every hour, I just enable it for the cron expression. And then I can save it. And you see I've got an Azure connector now, never synchronized. It'll do the next in an hour. So let's click the sync button. And then let's click sync. And then you'll see it actually will start to add users here, 5 users, 12 users, 20 users. I've got, I think, some 7,000 in our Azure, lab Azure. So that'll take a while. We'll not wait for it to finish. But if I just show you quickly here on user directories, you now see a Azure as an internal directory, which behaves exactly like any other Atlassian internal directory. So you can reorder it and everything. And if I click on users, you'll actually start to see Azure users appearing here. Before, I only had my 3 internal users, and now you can actually see the Azure AD users appear in there. So I'll leave that running. The next part we have to do is the SAML authentication. So now this way we get the users into the application, and now we configure the way how they can be authenticated.
Oh, good.
So if you go to the SAML single sign-on, then this is the first start wizard. Add a new identity provider. It's the
And the
type, and you
import
see
would be, if I have another instance already configured, I could export this and then import here.
exactly.
Yeah,
Yeah.
cool.
So, and you actually see there's a lot of identity provider that we have customized wizards for. Azure is one of them. So we go here. We give it a description. Users, for example. Here again is a link to the documentation, what we need. And it gives us all the URLs we need to paste into Azure, and with the right naming that Azure expects us. So if I just jump back to Azure, here in the, where is my Azure Active Directory? We've got enterprise applications here. And here it's a little bit quicker, because we are part of the Azure Store. So if I search for Confluence here, you'll see there's one from Microsoft, but that's really only supported on Windows systems, not the others, and lagging behind. Then you've got Cantega, which you had on last year in one of your YouTube sessions.
Yeah,
So
there's
that's one
another
of our
video that
competition.
you could look at if you are interested in their solution.
And then you've got ours. And being in this catalog is actually quite important, because it's the only way that people who use the free version of Azure Active Directory can actually use SAML. So, and the premium version is decently expensive. Lots of customers use it, but a lot of the customers who just use Office 365, they're using the free version of Azure, and then they can only use one of those 3 apps to integrate it with Confluence or Jira, etc. So I create this demo. So it's adding the application. Usually it doesn't take too long.
So it's a full day of
Like I said,
Microsoft for me.
sounds like it. And yeah, sometimes there are nicer UIs than the Azure AD UI, to be fair. So
I'll
it should
spare you of my
actually,
comments.
it's still adding it.
But I
Otherwise,
had some coworkers swap our G Suite banner for the Draw.io banner before we started this. So I do have a preference on those identity providers and general those solutions, Office 365, G Suite, and so on.
So added successfully. So go back to the enterprise applications. So this is the enterprise application, how Azure calls it. We now need to go to did I just take the wrong one? Why is that UI changed?
Maybe properties or?
No, it's sign on. Let me just enterprise applications. Oh, that's really the one I just created. Let me just quickly look at this. Okay, let's reconfigure this just quickly. So you basically go into single sign-on and need to put in the identifier URL, the reply URL, and the sign-on URL.
It seems to be always
save
the
that.
same for.
It's the same, and if you look at the plugin here, it's 3 times the same. So it's the identifier, the reply URL, and the sign-on URL, and the same terminology you had from Azure.
So you seem to be smart to find out which type of call is needed or delivered.
Exactly. No, I'll test later. Here you also see some of the default attributes that are configured in this integration that will be sent via SAML. Obviously username, but a decent amount of more will be sent. And now we can download the metadata for this. So a lot of identity providers support the exchange of metadata, which makes the configuration a lot quicker and more seamless. So we download that, and then I can go back to our plugin. Next, I can say I have a metadata XML file. Select that file.
Do those
Confluence.
Azure things support files in the Active Directory, like pictures or PDFs or even videos?
I'm not sure I understand you now. So give me an example.
I'm still, and this is only loosely connected here, but like I'm thinking of, again, our beefer profile pages. Something that people do a lot is they try to make this intranet profile their own, which means that they upload stuff like pictures, like a picture of themselves in a suit, a picture of themselves while they were doing soccer with people in the company, and maybe a PDF of a certification that they acquired. And I'm thinking whether this can be synced. So is file transfer a valid option? Or can you only sync text?
Well, on the SAML attributes, it's text, but it can be encoded text. So for some of the stuff that would work, for example, via SAML avatar images should probably work, but not in the size that you want. However, you can define in Azure AD, there's lots of fields already. You can define additional fields, which you can then synchronize. Which you can then synchronize via the API. So if we have user sync and the API connection, then you have more options. But could it do a PDF? I can't tell you.
To sync URIs, right? URLs. So if I have a URL for my picture, I could just give you that, and then the other application have to make sure that they can display it somehow, but still the data would be there.
Exactly.
Yeah. Okay.
So I can now do import. Then it'll say the metadata import is successful. Next, here it's asking me if the usernames are the same on both sides, which they are because we synchronize it in via Azure. And that's one of the things where I think we differentiate us a lot from a lot of other plugins. And no one comes close to the features that we have is that we could now modify usernames through a set of regular expressions and other things for those kind of historically grown Jiras that a lot of enterprises have. So we go way beyond the simple setups in a lot of cases. I'm just going to do next here. We don't want to do any user updates. That's done via user sync already. Can say save for next. Now I could test the integration, show you a little bit of the troubleshooting tools, but in a matter of time, I don't think that's the best use of our time now. I would actually swap to my skip test and configure. So it basically done the configuration. You see users are still being synchronized in. If you like, I would actually go to our Jira where I prepared 3 identity providers, because it might be worth showing a few of the features that are more on the advanced side.
Go for it.
So if I go to See a demo Jira. Just going to log in.
And now we can see how this works.
Yeah, I'm as an admin, I'm still going to log in locally, but I'm going to open a. I'm just going to show you how it works when you just have one identity provider. So I'm just going to change the IDP selection. To the one with the lowest weight. And then I'm going to open an incognito window. Most of the testing I do in an incognito window because I want to keep logged in as an admin on the Jira and not have to log out and log in. So if I do say a demo Jira, go there, it's going to redirect me to that's Azure AD, where I can enter my Azure AD.lab.resolution.de. Okay, so stay signed in. Doesn't matter in the incognito window. And now I'm logged into the demo Jira. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So this time I wasn't authenticated Jira, so I'm just going to quickly log out of the application here. And if I just go to the same thing again, you'll see the single sign-on happening, and I'm there. So now you can tell me if that's more than 300 milliseconds or not.
Milliseconds, yeah. But still, like in real life, I think it's fair to tell people that there are situations where this may take longer. Just as you experienced before, it could be that on a Microsoft side, you have to log in twice for whatever reasons, or it could just be that there's some slowness in your internet connection because there's like multiple services that may be exchanging information. So I think 200 milliseconds is a promise that you won't always be able to deliver on.
That is correct. And a lot depends on if your Jira is very slow or not. So this login is not faster than your Jira is in the background. And you've seen a lot of what has just taken time was actually going to the dashboard and showing the dashboard, not so much the login.
You get the win in that session for staying below 200 milliseconds.
No worries. But this is an medium EC2 instance in AWS. So there is no real magic that we do to make this look quicker usual. However, that's what I showed you is sort of the normal user experience with you log in via Azure ID. These users are synced in, but that's not the more advanced stuff I would like to show you. If I look at identity providers here, you actually see I've got an Azure one and an EMEA one defined here. One is ADFS, and the other one is Azure AD. So a lot of the enterprise customers, and again, that's something you couldn't do with DC SAML, and that's not something all the other plugins in the marketplace can do either. If you have your users across more than just one platform, one identity provider, you need to be able to configure multiple ones, which you can, but you also have to have a way to provide users a way to select the ones they want to authenticate against. Remember, when we have to redirect you, we don't know who you are at that point. Yeah. So we have multiple methods, and the most commonly used one is the IDP selection page. So if I just quickly turn that on.
Okay, so I can choose, yeah.
You can choose, exactly. If I go back here.
But what is the lowest weight?
Lowest, okay.
I didn't dare to ask because I thought it was
no.
I didn't understand nevertheless.
Now you can easily understand. You're the master of time. So let me quickly do that. If you look for every identity provider we have configured, there's a value at the bottom here, which is called weight. Yeah, and it's just a number. 5, 10, 20. First one is usually 10. Second one is 20.
It's just like a given priority.
It's a given priority. If you see even some of the customers who only have one identity provider, they may have an active and a standby ADFS farm in their standby.
Are you going to iterate through multiple identity providers if my login doesn't work for the first one?
No, that's not
because
possible.
you can't, right? You can't.
Exactly.
It's their page.
Yeah. The identity provider won't redirect you back if you couldn't log in. But we have some customers.
So the IDP selection is probably the smartest choice.
Yes. Some customers, like I said, have a backup ADFS and monitor that in their network monitoring system, and then change the weight in our API, for example, once one goes down. Yeah. Or it's also a good way if you're migrating, for example, from ADFS to Azure. You can set up like I've done here. You can set up two, test them individually via a special URL, and once you're happy it all works, you switch over, and your rollback is quite easy. If you have to roll back, you just go change the weight again. So you can have multiple active.
Okay, but this is kind of more of a transitional feature, because if I'm choosing on my own, then obviously I can have multiple. I can have G Suite, I can have Okta, I can have Microsoft all together, and then depending on what I choose as user, you'll authenticate against. But the choose the one with the lowest weight is more. The others aren't active. I can make them active by putting their priority with the lower number. And that's kind of a transition phase where I want to try out something new.
Exactly. Transition or backup.
Yeah. Can I have a deactivate or inactive thing? Because if I have people choose, I would still want to try out something, but I wouldn't want users to try out because I'm still trying out and I don't want to make this public right now.
Not as such, not as a configurable option at the moment. However, what happens, and I can show you that as well now, everything we show to a user, we have in a page template. Okay. So it's all template. So the default page that you see, select your identity provider, you'll see that in a second. That's a page template here. Yeah. And these templates, especially the selection page template and the error page template, they are usually heavily customized by the partner or by the customer. IDP selection, very often the customer completely redesigns to make more sense to their users, to use their terminology, that they know what to choose. And then it's down to your choice which ones you're actually going to show to the user. And the error page template is very often that people add at least their help desk details, etc. On there. And we've seen some more innovative uses of those templates as well.
Okay, Chris, we've consumed quite a lot of time right now. Is there stuff that you think really make a difference at this point? We're pretty into the details already, talking about how I work with multiple IDPs, which is obviously something that you can do better than your competition can do.
Yes, and I've just popped up the slide again. That is sort of what a lot of enterprises find themselves in being challenged with, or having challenges. One is the multiple identity provider. The next one is having different usernames, historically grown Jira, versus now it needs to be connected to an identity provider. So we can do regular expressions. We can look up via email. So there's a lot of functionality we have in there. The same for different group names. We can run them through a set of regular expressions to transform them. But also, I think our plugin is one of the ones which has the most adaptability to customer organizational structures and policies. What I mean with that, you'll have sometimes a similar customer, and once he wants to take the user identities from the identity provider, but manage all groups locally, because the Jira admin wants to do it, and he doesn't want to raise a ticket to India, which takes 3 weeks to create a group in the IDP. And another similar-sized customer in a similar situation is exactly the opposite. He says no local users, no local groups, everything from the identity provider, nothing else. So you get, with our plugin, you get the fine granularity to configure all of this. While 80% of the setups are super simple, follow the step-by-step guides. You don't have to dive into any of the advanced features. If you need them, or if you find yourself 6 months down the line in a situation where you actually need them, you're quite glad that you have them. And we're also one of the only, actually the only that I know of that has a full API to manage the configuration, change things. And obviously for a lot of enterprise customers who clone their environments into dev, into testing, that's actually quite important to automate the sign-on sites as well. That might be sort of the important things, I'd say, around what also differentiates us a lot from the competition in terms of the feature set.
Cool. So one last thing.
Okay.
Let me ask you a mean question. Why are you losing business to Contega or other competitors?
I'm not sure we are losing too much. We've been gaining, even in the high percentages where we are, we have been gaining a market share over the last 2 years constantly. But I mean, let's take Contega. One of the fair use cases for Contega is if you absolutely need Kerberos, don't have any plans to support anything, any non-domain joined devices over the next 3-4 years, don't have Active Directory Federation servers, don't want to have them. And there are some financial customers, some things in that environment, and that's a fair use, and those guys are good guys. Then if you look at some of the other competition, they are on the price point cheaper. So people who are extremely price sensitive, and especially if they don't necessarily deploy them in a business critical role, they might choose that the cheaper price is more important to them than some of the features or some of the support that we offer. Like if you, the example is if you have LDAP connected, your Jira and synchronized, then, for example, single sign-on can be more of a nice to have. Yeah, you still have the fallback to authenticate with usernames and passwords, and if your vendor needs 2-3 days to respond, you might decide that's not the end of the world. However, if you use Azure AD this provisioning and the SAML is the only way how people can get in and log in, then that might be totally unacceptable for you, and you might decide, okay, I pay for what I get, so I have to pay a higher price to get a higher service level.
Cool. When you began, I thought this would be a political answer, but I'm fully happy with the answers. Thanks for being open and speaking your mind. Put away the slide and give us your face for the ending, please.
Absolutely. Once I figured out how to do that.
There's always a button for these things.
Yes. You're damn right, there's a button. Where is it?
Like if you go back to the tab that actually initiated that, on the top, you'll have end screen recording. We're gonna be able to. So
it looks like my Chrome has
the window.
Yeah, exactly. There, hang on, there we are.
Yeah. Now you can end it.
Screen share.
There he is. Awesome, Christian. Thank you so much for walking us through and preparing all this and taking the time to explain this in a very professional and easy to understand manner. I thank you a lot for doing that for us and our customers.
It's my pleasure, and the nice thing in this whole Atlassian ecosystem, dealing with you, dealing with others, and a lot of the customers, it's actually very nice, very friendly. So I really enjoy what I'm doing, and I think we have a good product. So I'd love if people check it out. And you said it wasn't a political answer. There are other people who do good stuff as well in that ecosystem, and very often it's down to what is important to the customer, and that's where they deserve choice.
And I understand that your AirPods are actually new, as you said yesterday. They still
last
hold after more than an hour. We were discussing whether a cable attached headphone would be better. Thanks for charging them, and thanks for putting all this energy in the session. If you like that, you can give us a thumbs up. You can subscribe to our channel. You can reach out to Christian, which is resolution.de. And is there a special page for your app that you would want people to go to, or a support channel that you want to highlight?
Let me If you go to resolution.de/go/marketplace, you'll find our marketplace listing in Atlassian and find all the documentation, all the support. If you go to resolution.de/go/support, you get straight to our support portal. Really, what I can only encourage people, reach out to us, even if you're only doing an evaluation, want to see it. Sometimes making a screen share session with us actually makes sense. Because not all of this is just technical stuff. Sometimes you might want to make a decision what's organizationally better, what have other customers done in similar circumstances, how have they chosen to set up. And we are in the lucky place to see literally thousands of customers making their choices and talking to us. And we see what sometimes works better or what are the pros and cons. So we are also happy to advise you on this is a great setup, or if you do go down this route, then that might be the downside with it. So beyond just the technical stuff of the app, we can help you with some of the best practices around it as well.
Cool. And also this format helps you to get to know the people behind the plugins and the apps a little. Thanks, Christian, for being with us. If you find that interesting, you can also leave a comment below and stay tuned. Thanks. Bye-bye.
Okay. Thank you. Bye-bye.